April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above Cannes, France. The oxygen mask couldn't hide Lieutenant Ralph Hermicon's grin as he watched the slow-climbing shapes of enemy planes pushing up toward his formation through the clear canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5. The veteran pilot from Jägerschwader 26 studied the American aircraft making their first appearance in the skies over occupied Europe. "They've sent us flying milk bottles," he joked to his wingman, laughing at the sight of the bulky Republic P-47 Thunderbolt struggling for altitude below. 16 P-47CS from the 4th Fighter Group were rising in formation, their 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engines fighting to lift nearly 7 tons of metal. To German pilots used to the elegant Spitfires and quick Soviet fighters, these thick-bodied American planes looked ridiculous. Round fuselages with glass canopies, wings too small for their weight, and massive propellers larger than anything in the Luftwaffe. What Hermicon didn't know, what none of the circling German pilots could have guessed, was that they were looking at the machine that would soon cripple the Luftwaffe's fighter force. Within 18 months, those same milk bottles would become a symbol of death in the skies, their 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns tearing enemy planes apart. Each P-47 carried 3,400 rounds of ammunition with combined fire rate of 6,000 rounds per minute, enough to slice a Messerschmitt in half in just a couple of seconds. That transformation began on this very morning. Major Donald Blakesley, leading the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation moving in for attack. A veteran of the RAF's Eagle Squadron who had only recently switched from Spitfires, he knew something his younger pilots didn't. Survival in a P-47 meant unlearning everything they knew about air combat. The Thunderbolt wasn't built to turn or climb like other fighters. It was designed to overpower and outlast. Where the Germans valued agility, Republic Aviation had built a high-altitude powerhouse that used brute strength, speed, and heavy guns to change how aerial warfare was fought. Among the 56 American pilots scattered over France that day were men who would later become aces and legends. But on April 8, 1943, they were rookies in a new aircraft facing the most experienced airmen in the world. The Germans had been fighting since 1939, hardened by campaigns in Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. The Americans were flying in combat for the very first time. This was the story of how mass production and industrial power would eventually overcome tactical brilliance, how quantity and quality together would turn the tide, and how laughter from above would soon give way to fear once the Americans opened fire at 400 yards. The story of the P-47 began in June 1940, when panic swept through the U.S. Army Air Corps after the fall of France. Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's chief designer from Georgia, was ordered to create a high-altitude interceptor that could stand against the best German planes. What he built instead was a giant unlike anything before. "It'll be a dinosaur," Kartveli told his team, "but a well-balanced one." When the XP-47B prototype took to the air on May 6, 1941, it stunned everyone. At 9,900 pounds empty, it was 65% heavier than the earlier P-43 Lancer. The huge turbo supercharger system running through its rear fuselage gave it a bulging, awkward look, and test pilots often asked the same question: can this thing really fly? It could, and it flew brilliantly at high altitude. The R-2800 double Wasp engine could still deliver full power at 27,000 feet, where German engines choked for air. Its exhaust-driven turbo supercharger provided sea-level performance in the thin upper atmosphere where few fighters could operate. At first, pilots hated it. Major Hubert Hub Zemke, leading the 56th Fighter Group during training in Connecticut, called it dangerous. Between late 1942 and early 1943, the group lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in accidents. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than the Germans did in its first months of combat. It was tricky to handle, rolling over on takeoff, spinning on landing, and diving so fast that the controls would lock up as shockwaves formed on the wings. But once pilots learned its secrets, the plane showed its true power. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma who would later score 27 victories, described his first flight. It was like being strapped to a train engine. The power was unreal. You didn't fly it, you aimed it. The first air battles in April and May 1943 seemed to prove the Germans right. The P-47s couldn't outturn the Focke-Wulf 190s, couldn't climb as fast as the Messerschmitt 109s, and felt sluggish at medium heights. Luftwaffe pilots quickly found ways to use these flaws to their advantage, attacking from below where the heavy Thunderbolts struggled and forcing them into turning fights where agility meant everything. Colonel Joseph Pips Priller, who led Jagerschwader 26, reported after his first meeting with the new American planes, saying, "They're easy kills. They fly like trucks, turn like trains, and climb like cows." German pilots even gave them mocking nicknames, calling them Indians, big targets pretending to be fighters. Early numbers seemed to support the arrogance. In their first month in combat, American squadrons lost 14 Thunderbolts while only managing to shoot down 3 German aircraft. Even the British, flying their agile Spitfires, doubted the Americans' choice. RAF pilots joked that the best evasive move in a P-47 was to get out of the cockpit and run around inside it. But something the Germans didn't notice was happening. The few Thunderbolts that were shot down had taken insane amounts of damage before falling. One aircraft came back from a mission on May 4th riddled with 21 cannon hits and more than 100 machine gun holes, damage that would have shredded a Messerschmitt or Spitfire. The big radial engine, without fragile coolant lines, could take direct hits and still keep running. And when a P-47 did line up a shot, the results were devastating. Its 8.50 caliber Browning guns created a deadly storm of bullets that tore through anything in front of it. While most fighters could only fire in short bursts, the Thunderbolt could keep up steady fire for over 30 seconds, forever in a dogfight. Everything changed on June 26, 1943, over Lille, France. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron was flying with a group of 48 P-47s returning from escort duty when they were attacked by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s led by Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, the younger brother of Germany's famous Ace Adolf Galland. The Germans came down out of the sun in a perfect dive. Johnson, flying near the back, was caught in a crossfire. Within seconds, his plane was riddled. 20mm shells ripped through the fuselage. His canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid burst into the cockpit, and flames flared under the dashboard. Johnson was hit in the face and leg by shrapnel and bullets. He tried to bail out but found the canopy jammed. One shell had exploded right in its track, sealing it shut. Trapped inside a dying plane at 27,000 feet, he somehow managed to keep the aircraft level despite almost no visibility through the oil-covered windscreen and an engine shaking itself apart. Somehow the Thunderbolt still flew. Then things got worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190 spotted the crippled P-47 crawling toward the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. No one ever confirmed who the German pilot was, though historians have narrowed it to a few names. What followed became one of the most incredible duels in air war history. The German lined up behind Johnson and fired every round from his 4 cannons and 2 machine guns. Johnson could only crouch behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt soaked up every shell. When the German ran out of cannon ammo, he circled and opened up again with his machine guns. Finally, the German pulled alongside, staring at the wrecked plane that still refused to fall. Johnson could see the pilot clearly, young blonde, his face going from confident to stunned. He fired his last rounds, then flew up beside Johnson once more, shook his head in disbelief, gave a small salute, and turned away. Out of ammunition, he left the scene. Johnson somehow made it back to England, landing at Manston just as his engine died. His crew stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. One cannon round had exploded just inches from his head. Another hit the armor plate behind his seat. The engine was shredded, control cables nearly cut through, and the main fuselage beams had holes right through them. Yet the plane had survived. The story shocked both sides. American engineers couldn't believe how tough their own aircraft was until they examined it. German intelligence officers refused to accept the reports at first. No fighter, they said, could take that much damage and stay in the air. But witness statements from several pilots confirmed the truth. The Thunderbolt had taken everything the Luftwaffe could throw at it and still made it home. By July 1943, American pilots finally began to understand the P-47's real power. Colonel Hubert Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group summed it up after many hard lessons. Don't try to turn with them. Don't climb with them down low. Use your weight. Use your speed. Use your guns. What once seemed like a flaw, the plane's heavy build, turned into its biggest weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a Thunderbolt could hit 550 miles per hour, faster than any German plane, even straight down. That dive speed could be traded for altitude in a climbing burst that left enemies far behind. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, one of America's first aces in Europe, turned this idea into a new method of attack. He called it boom and zoom, but the pilots nicknamed it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Rather than getting into tight turning dogfights, P-47 squadrons began fighting on their own terms. They climbed high, up to 30,000 feet, where German planes could barely operate. When enemy fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts rolled over and dived straight down at incredible speed. At those speeds, German pilots couldn't even aim properly, and by the time the Americans opened fire at the bottom of their dives, it was too late. Surviving Luftwaffe pilots later said it felt like flying into a wall of bullets. Anything caught in that stream of gunfire wasn't just shot down, it was torn apart in midair. The full power of American fire was revealed on August 17, 1943, during the twin raids on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest missions into Germany up to that point. The operation exposed both the Thunderbolt's weakness, its short range even with drop tanks, and its frightening effectiveness in combat. Major David Schilling led 4 P-47s from the 62nd Fighter Squadron when they spotted a group of German Me-110 heavy fighters getting ready to attack the B-17 bombers. These twin-engine aircraft carried heavy cannons and rockets, but weren't very agile. Schilling's flight dove from 28,000 feet like falling stones. Gunner Heinrich Roth, one of the few to survive, later recalled during interrogation, "The Americans came down like hammers from the sky. I hit one at 800 meters. The shells struck his wing. Nothing happened. Then he fired. The plane ahead of me just vanished. Not shot down, destroyed, wings gone, tail gone, the whole thing shredded. In less than a minute, Me-110s and Me-210s were gone." German pilots had never seen that kind of concentrated gunfire. Each P-47 carried 8.50 caliber guns with 425 rounds each, 3,400 rounds in total, weighing about 900 pounds. All 8 guns were set to meet at about 300 yards ahead of the aircraft, creating a 6-foot-wide circle of destruction that poured out nearly 100 bullets every second at 2,900 feet per second. This firepower came straight from America's vast factories. German fighters, armed with cannons that held only 120 to 200 rounds, had to fire in short bursts. But Thunderbolt pilots could keep their triggers pressed for over 30 seconds, long enough to shred anything unlucky enough to cross their path. Their ammo belts were mixed with armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer rounds to both rip through metal and set it on fire. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, who later became America's top ace in Europe with 28 kills, described it bluntly: "When all 8 guns hit, they don't just go down, they explode. I once saw a 109 cut clean in half." By September 1943, the Luftwaffe began to realize something even worse. The higher the Thunderbolt flew, the better it performed, while German planes lost power. The P-47's turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine could hold full power up to 30,000 feet, but the Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts, using simpler superchargers, gasped for air above 25,000. One of Germany's most successful aces, Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, learned this the hard way on October 8, 1943. He led a formation of FW-190A6 fighters against B-17s over Bremen at 28,000 feet, but his engine struggled badly in the thin air. When Thunderbolts from the 56 Fighter Group dove on them from above, they had no chance. Robert Johnson, now experienced P-47 ace, spotted Phillips' distinctively painted aircraft and fired from 300 yards with a 30-degree lead. His report was simple: hits along fuselage. Enemy exploded. No parachute. Phillips' death shocked the Luftwaffe. If even a veteran of 500 missions couldn't survive, what chance did anyone else have? The German High Command ordered a full study of the new American fighter. The report sent to Hermann Göring in November 1943 was grim. The P-47 could climb higher than any German plane, up to 42,000 feet. It could dive at near supersonic speed. It was heavily armored, with steel plates and bulletproof glass protecting both pilot and engine. Worst of all, it could take hits that would destroy 3 other planes and still make it home. In January 1944, the P-47D-22 arrived in England, a version that turned the Thunderbolt from a joke into a nightmare. This model had a huge 13-foot-wide Hamilton standard propeller with broad paddle-shaped blades that grabbed the air like oars. The result was a massive jump in performance. Earlier Thunderbolts climbed at only about 2,200 feet per minute, but the new version could reach 3,000, rivaling the German fighters. The big prop also gave it much quicker acceleration and better energy in level flight. German ace Helmut Nock of Jagerschwader 11 met these new P-47s in February 1944 while intercepting bombers near Hanover. In his diary, he wrote, "The fat American fighters can climb now. We attacked expecting our usual edge. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to pull away, they followed to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was hit and blew apart. There's nothing left but smoke. These aren't the same machines we laughed at last year." The new propeller did more than boost performance. It changed the Thunderbolt's voice. The spinning tips broke the sound barrier, giving off a deep roaring thunder that could be heard miles away. German soldiers on the ground soon learned to recognize it instantly. They called it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. It meant one thing: death was coming from above. By March 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt had finally become a true long-range escort fighter. With external fuel tanks fitted, usually two 108-gallon tanks under the wings or a 75-gallon one under the belly, it could fly more than 1,000 miles. Thanks to the new paddle blade propeller, the plane handled well even when carrying extra fuel. Once the tanks were dropped, it could fight on even ground with German planes. The Luftwaffe tried to focus on the bombers instead, hoping to inflict enough losses to force the Americans to abandon daylight raids. But that meant they had to get through the P-47 escorts first, a deadly challenge. Many German pilots began to respect and even fear the Thunderbolt. One of Germany's most famous aces, Major Gunther Röhl, who had 275 victories, mostly on the Eastern Front, met the P-47s on March 6, 1944. He was badly wounded in that fight. Years later, he recalled, "We saw them above us, big shapes against the sun. Someone joked, 'Here come the flying pigs.' 30 seconds later, no one was laughing. They dropped on us like an avalanche. The first pass wiped out 3 of our fighters. Their guns didn't fire short bursts like ours. They fired steady streams. If you were caught in it, you died instantly." The escort mission showed another major strength of the P-47 endurance. While German fighters burned fuel quickly at high power, the big American radial engines could cruise efficiently for hours. The Thunderbolts could stay with the bombers all the way in and back, trading positions in the escort line while still keeping enough fuel for combat. When P-51 Mustangs began arriving in larger numbers in spring 1944 to handle the deepest missions, the Thunderbolt found a new role that made it even more feared: ground attack. Starting in April 1944, as the Allies prepared to invade France, the P-47 became the backbone of low-level airstrikes. Its 8 heavy machine guns tore through German ground targets just as easily as enemy aircraft. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds could punch through the thinner top armor of tanks and trucks, and the sheer amount of bullets meant soft targets were shredded in seconds. A 2-second burst sent about 160 half-inch bullets into a target area the size of a small vehicle. Then came bombs and rockets, which turned the Thunderbolt into a flying war machine. The P-47D-25 version could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs under its wings and another 500-pound bomb under the fuselage, about the same load as an early war bomber. Later versions carried 10 5-inch high-velocity rockets, each with the explosive punch of a 105mm artillery shell. German soldiers quickly learned to dread the sight and sound of them. Colonel Hans von Luck of the 125th Panzergrenadier Regiment witnessed a Thunderbolt attack in Normandy. They came in so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was unbearable. Engines roaring, rockets screaming, then the crash of machine guns. In one run, 20 of our trucks disappeared in fire and smoke. The men were terrified. We called them Jabos, fighter bombers, but these are more like flying artillery. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the P-47 had completely changed the air war. More than 500 Thunderbolts flew over the beaches that morning, forming a wall of protection over the invasion. German pilots who tried to reach the coast were slaughtered. One of the few who made it through, Lieutenant Wolfgang Fischer, later said, "The sky belonged to the Americans." The Thunderbolts were everywhere, from sea level up to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn. 12 fighters took off. I was the only one who came back. You couldn't go above them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned us into falling metal. After D-Day, Thunderbolts became the hammer of the Allied advance. In June alone, the 9th Air Force's P-47s destroyed 651 locomotives, nearly 4,000 trucks, over 500 tanks and armored vehicles, and more than 4,500 horse-drawn wagons. German forces were forced to move only at night, slowing their entire war effort. They tried to fight back with heavier armor, more flak guns, and better camouflage, but nothing stopped the P-47s. Their speed, firepower, and armor made them almost impossible to bring down, even for the dreaded 88mm guns. While they ravaged Europe, Thunderbolts were also proving their worth in the Pacific. The 348th Fighter Group, based in New Guinea, found the plane ideal for the long distances and rough conditions there. Colonel Neil Kirby, their commander, developed tactics suited to the Pacific theater. On October 11, 1943, he led just 4 P-47s against 40 Japanese aircraft over Wewak and shot down 6 himself in one mission, earning the Medal of Honor. Japanese pilots, used to fighting lightweight American planes like the P-40, were shocked by the Thunderbolt's toughness. The famous Japanese ace Saburo Sakai later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannons that could destroy a P-40 in a few hits did nothing to them. I fired dozens of shells into one and watched it keep flying. Their return fire was terrifying, streams of bullets that tore planes apart." A new version, the P-47N, was built specifically for the Pacific. It had larger fuel tanks built into its wings, each holding 93 gallons, giving it a range of more than 2,300 miles. These Thunderbolts could escort B-29 bombers all the way to Japan, an incredible change from the short-range fighter of just a year earlier. The ultimate proof of how far the Thunderbolt had come came when it faced Germany's jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Me-262, capable of over 540 miles per hour, was far faster than any piston-engine plane. But P-47 pilots learned they could catch the jets at 2 moments, when they were taking off or landing, or by diving from great height at incredible speed. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group became one of the first to shoot down a Me-262 using a P-47. Diving from 28,000 feet, Meyer's Thunderbolt hit nearly 500 miles per hour, fast enough to catch the German jet even in level flight. The Me-262 pilot, sure of his speed advantage, never saw the diving P-47 until Meyer opened fire from 400 yards away. In his combat report, Meyer wrote, "The enemy plane broke apart under my fire. Large pieces, including both engines, tore away from the fuselage. The pilot did not get out." The concentrated power of 8.50 caliber guns was far more effective against jets than expected. By early 1945, new P-47M models were built specifically to chase down German jets and V-1 flying bombs. With water methanol injection boosting the double Wasp engine to 2,800 horsepower and cleaner aerodynamics, these Thunderbolts could hit 470 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, fast enough to challenge jets in certain conditions. Major George Bostwick, commander of the 63rd Fighter Squadron, shot down 2 Me-262s in March 1945. His after-action report focused on one thing: firepower over speed. "The jets are faster," he wrote, "but they can't turn, and they can't take hits. One good burst from our guns, and they fall apart like paper. They have to slow down to attack bombers. That's when we get them." The clearest proof of American industrial power came on January 1, 1945, during Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's desperate attempt to destroy Allied air power. Almost 900 German fighters, including their best remaining pilots, launched surprise strikes on Allied bases in Belgium and the Netherlands. At the Y-34 airfield near Metz, home to the 365th Fighter Group's P-47s, the first wave succeeded in destroying 22 Thunderbolts and several other planes on the ground. When a captured German pilot was brought to the base command post, he pointed to the burning aircraft and sneered, "What do you think of that?" Major George Brooking looked out at his crews already clearing debris and replied, "By tomorrow we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The Germans' grin vanished. Within 48 hours, brand new P-47D-40S had arrived from England to replace the losses. The Luftwaffe, however, lost 271 planes and 213 pilots, many of them instructors and squadron leaders they could never replace. The Americans lost 134 aircraft across all the targeted airfields and replaced everyone within a week. The numbers spoke for themselves. By war's end, Republic Aviation had built 15,683 Thunderbolts, more than any other U.S. fighter. At the peak of production, the Farmingdale plant in New York was rolling out 1 aircraft every hour, day and night. Another factory in Evansville, Indiana, built from empty farmland in 1942, was producing 500 planes a month by 1944. Each Thunderbolt required 65,000 parts, 8 miles of electrical wire, 2,000 pounds of aluminum, and 300 pounds of rubber. The engine alone had over 2,400 precisely machined components. Many of the workers assembling them were women who had never even seen an airplane before the war. Yet they built these machines with remarkable accuracy and reliability. The ammunition output was just as massive. Each P-47 mission used up 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber bullets. With hundreds of Thunderbolts flying daily, ammunition use exceeded 10 million rounds per month by mid-1944. The Lake City Arsenal in Missouri, one of several U.S. plants, produced 30 million rounds each month. Every cartridge was made to exact measurements, accurate to within 10,000ths of an inch, to feed perfectly through the guns without jamming. Fuel use was staggering, too. Each Thunderbolt burned about 100 gallons per hour in normal flight and up to 300 gallons during combat with a water boost system engaged. By late 1944, the 9th Air Force alone was using over 25 million gallons of fuel every month, all shipped across the Atlantic in tankers that were themselves built in vast American shipyards. Even more impressive than planes or fuel was the pilot training program. By 1944, the United States was producing 30,000 new pilots each year, more than Germany trained during the entire war. Each American fighter pilot received at least 400 flight hours before entering combat, including 100 hours in advanced training aircraft. By contrast, late-war German pilots often had less than 100 total hours when sent into battle. The difference showed. American pilots reached Europe with solid training in formation flying, navigation, gunnery, and tactics. Many had studied captured German planes and knew their opponent's strengths and weaknesses. They also understood their own machines inside and out, thanks to detailed manuals and technical schooling, something most German pilots never had. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, who arrived in England in September 1944, recalled, "I had 420 hours of flying time, including 75 in the P-47. I practiced firing at towed targets, learned to lead my shots, and studied gun camera film from real fights. On my first mission, I knew exactly what to do." The German pilot I faced probably had less than half my experience. It wasn't a fair fight. In March 1945, Oberstleutnant Joseph Pips Priller, the same man who had once mocked the Thunderbolt as a pregnant cow, was interviewed for a German propaganda film. His words, considered too depressing to release, showed how completely his view had changed. The Thunderbolt is the best fighter bomber ever made. Its firepower is unmatched, guns that never jam, never overheat, never run dry. It carries bombs like a medium bomber, fires rockets like artillery, and still fights like a true fighter. But what it really shows is America's endless production. They lose 10 planes and build 20 more. We lose one and it's gone forever. Their pilots are better trained than our instructors. They have fuel for training, ammunition for practice, and spares for everything. We have nothing but courage, and courage without resources only delays defeat. We laughed at them in 1943. We're not laughing now. When you hear those guns, you know death is coming. The sound is cold, mechanical, and unstoppable. They didn't beat us with skill or bravery. They buried us under steel and lead. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed mostly on paper. There was no fuel, few working planes, and almost no experienced pilots left. Airfields were bombed into rubble. Even when German pilots managed to take off, they faced impossible odds, Thunderbolt formations dominating every altitude from the ground up to 40,000 feet. Sergeant Klaus Brechtender, one of the last German pilots to finish training that year, flew a single mission before the war ended. He later recalled, "I saw them coming from above for Thunderbolts in perfect formation. The fight lasted 12 seconds. I tried to turn, but they were too fast. The leader fired from about 500 meters away. My plane shook violently, like it was being smashed with hammers. The engine blew up, the wing ripped off, and I barely managed to get out. Hanging in my parachute, I watched them wipe out my entire unit. 6 planes gone in less than a minute. The sky was filled with falling metal, fire, and bodies. That single fight summed up what German pilots came to call Jabo fever, or fighter bomber fever. It was more than fear, it was a physical reaction. Luftwaffe doctors reported pilots trembling, sweating, or even vomiting whenever Thunderbolts were spotted nearby. Men who had once faced Spitfires and Hurricanes without flinching now grew sick before missions against P-47s. Ground troops, too, panicked at the sound of the Thunderbolt's engine. They knew that once that deep roar filled the air, survival meant dropping everything and finding cover. The final statistics of the Thunderbolt's destruction were staggering. In Europe alone, P-47 shot down 3,752 German planes in the air and destroyed another 3,315 on the ground. They wiped out 86,000 railcars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 tanks and armored vehicles, 68,000 trucks, and 60,000 horse-drawn wagons. In the Pacific, Thunderbolts downed 697 Japanese aircraft in combat, destroyed another 150 on the ground, and knocked out 1,500 vehicles and 150 locomotives, along with countless ships, barges, and military sites. The 9th Air Force, mostly flying P-47s, carried out 213,873 combat missions. They dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, and launched 60,000 rockets. Thunderbolt squadrons achieved an aerial kill ratio of 4.6 to 1, while suffering the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. Behind those numbers was a grim reality for Germany. The Luftwaffe lost around 28,000 pilots fighting the Western Allies, many of them torn apart by the Thunderbolt's heavy machine guns. Every loss represented years of training that Germany could never replace. By 1945, most new German pilots entered battle with fewer than 30 hours of combat flying. The average American P-47 pilot had over 200 hours. Capture documents from Germany's interrogation center at Oberursel showed how their view of the P-47 completely flipped during the war. April 1943. Large, slow, poor maneuverability. Inferior to German fighters in all ways except dive speed. Guns inadequate against cannon-armed aircraft. Minimal threat. December 1943. Excellent high-altitude performance. Very strong structure. Firepower increasingly dangerous. Pilots showing improved tactics. Serious threat above 25,000 feet. June 1944. Dominant fighter bomber. Superior to all German types above 20,000 feet. Firepower devastating. Extremely hard to shoot down. Critical threat at all altitudes. March 1945. Best fighter bomber of the war. Unmatched combination of strength, firepower, and performance. Pilot quality exceptional. Impossible to survive in direct combat. For decades later, in 1985, German and American veterans met in Phoenix, Arizona. During the reunion, former Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland, once head of all German fighter units, was asked about the Thunderbolt. His reply, captured on video, said everything. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We laughed when we first saw the Thunderbolt. It was huge, heavy. We said the Americans had built a bomber and called it a fighter. But we were the ones who didn't understand. The Americans didn't try to copy our style of plane. They built something only they could build, strong, mass-produced, and deadly. In a long war, the aircraft that could take hits, keep flying, and hit hard would always win. And they were right. After the war, I flew a captured P-47. The power was unbelievable. It climbed like it wanted to reach the sky itself. The cockpit was comfortable, the view excellent, the controls steady and precise. It was a true pilot's aircraft, wrapped in armor. But what impressed me most was this. America built over 15,000 of them, each with an engine more complex than anything we produced, while fighting 2 wars at once. That's when I knew we never had a chance. We used to call their guns Roosevelt's piano, because of the sound. Once you heard it, you never forgot. Many of my friends heard it for the last time. The P-47 didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed it. The Thunderbolt's design reflected America's entire industrial mindset. Raw power, over-engineering, and endless supply. Every part of it was built stronger than necessary. The wings could hold 40,000 pounds, 3 times the plane's full weight. The engine mount could handle 12 gs of force. All control cables were doubled with automatic backups. Even the gun system was a masterpiece of engineering. 8 separate ammo boxes, each feeding 425 rounds through electric motors that prevented jams during sharp turns or dives. The guns were electrically heated to stop freezing at altitude, and each one had its own charging system that could be fired or adjusted independently. Pilots could even set their bullet convergence anywhere between 150 and 400 yards to match their preferred fighting range. Some German veterans later insisted that the Americans only won because of numbers, not because their planes were better. But actual combat reports told a different story. When numbers were even, Thunderbolts usually came out on top. The 8 heavy machine guns, often dismissed by Germans as inferior to cannons, proved far more effective in real battles. Gun camera footage revealed why. Cannon shells were powerful but few in number and required perfect aim, while the Thunderbolt's guns threw out a thick stream of bullets that guaranteed hits. In a normal 2-second burst, a P-47 put at least 20 rounds into a fighter-sized target, enough to rip it apart completely. Even the bullets themselves were better designed. The .50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary rounds used a delayed fuse, allowing them to punch through armor before exploding. Every element of the P-47's weapon system was made for one thing: delivering unstoppable industrial-scale destruction. The incendiary mix burned at about 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to light aluminum frames on fire. German 20mm shells were heavier, but they often burst the moment they hit, making a big flash that could look dramatic while doing less real damage. The P-47 Thunderbolt was the heaviest single-engine piston fighter ever built in large numbers. Its empty weight, around 10,000 pounds, was more than the full takeoff weight of some twin-engine fighters. Its engine made more power than entire bomber groups had in the previous war. Its guns threw out more firepower than an infantry squad. And yet it was produced by the thousands, flown by young pilots barely out of high school, and kept running by mechanics who learned on the job in a matter of weeks. German views flipped from jokes to fear in under 2 years. In that short time, the flying milk bottle became the plane the Luftwaffe dreaded most. Veterans who had faced Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet Yaks without blinking still spoke quietly about the P-47 decades later. At the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D sits among other famous fighters. The sign lists the specs and battle records, but the small case beside it tells the real story. Spent .50 caliber casings and a strip of gun camera film showing a Focke-Wulf 190 coming apart under fire. Beneath it is a quote from an unnamed German pilot taken from a 1945 interrogation. "We laughed when we first saw them, fat, ugly American fighters that couldn't turn, couldn't climb, couldn't fight. We stopped laughing when we learned they didn't need to turn or climb. They just aimed those guns, and you were gone." Our laughter died with our comrades. The P-47 entered the war as a punchline and finished it as a wrecking tool. In between, 8 synchronized Browning machine guns changed air combat and buried the Luftwaffe under a storm of bullets. German pilots laughed at the awkward-looking American fighter in April 1943. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder spoke, and the sky belonged to America.